So let me begin with funding for fisheries surveys. You know the significance of the fisheries in my state. NMFS relies on annual surveys that are conducted by regional science centers to determine sustainable harvest levels. We've heard continued concerns that surveys are at risk due to budget pressures. My concern has always been that NOAA shouldn't be put in a situation where they've got to choose between personnel and survey funding. NOAA shouldn't have to make the trade-offs effectively that jeopardize the core mission of managing our fisheries and supporting our U.S. seafood producers. So, question for you about the surveys and how NOAA plans to accurately survey, and I guess more broadly, why the agency isn't requesting the funds that it needs for such a key part of its mission. Because if you don't have accurate surveys, you don't have sustainably managed fisheries.
Well, we certainly agree that we need accurate surveys in order to have accurate regulation of the fisheries. I think you are aware that, for example, in terms of the Pacific Salmon Treaty Agreement, there are quite a few very specific items that we have requested funding for. Those include $10 million in base grants for fisheries sampling and monitoring, for spawning estimates, and for assessing fishery exploitation rates. $2 million in grants to the states and tribes in order to support the coded wire tag program, which provides some essential information on harvest rates for Chinook and coho stocks managed under the treaty. Another $2 million for conservation Puget Sound critical stocks to preserve at-risk Puget Sound Chinook stocks through the ongoing implementation of state and tribal hatchery conservation. Another $2 million for the conservation of Puget Sound critical stocks to preserve at-risk Puget Sound Chinook stocks through the ongoing implementation of the program.
Mr. Secretary, if I can stop you there, because we have seen what will be required under this treaty, and it is substantial. It is significant, and unfortunately, the request underfunds. Now, last year there was an issue because we didn't have a clear picture of what would actually be needed to support the treaty agreement. And now that we have a more clear picture, we're still seeing that it is far less than is needed for implementation of the Pacific Salmon Treaty. So it seems to me we've got an issue here where we need to ensure that NOAA is prioritizing the funding because the federal government agreed to the obligations included in the treaty agreement. So if we don't put the funding to allow for the full implementation, effectively what we end up doing is shirking our diplomatic responsibility to support this bilateral treaty that we've entered into with Canada. So my fear is that if we don't have that adequate support on the federal side, you have states that are effectively expected to implement this federal treaty without the funding. And Alaska has seen this situation before. So I ask you and your team to look critically at the treaty, the requirements, what we know to fulfill that, and again, work with us not only on the Pacific Salmon Treaty, but the imperative for the fisheries surveys outside of what we're talking about with Pacific Salmon Treaty, because that is completely another issue. So you will hear me continue to enforce and reinforce the strength of our sustainably managed fisheries, but we are so reliant on NOAA. We are so reliant on NIMS. We're so reliant on making sure that we have accurate data.